That will be the reestablishment of the true powerhouse of the world. And when that leadership is in place, those things will be reinstituted. I don't think it's possible to keep those things not being in a kingdom or not being in a society that allows for you to do it in the way in which it needs to be done.
The Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacle. So when Christ comes back, we're going to be keeping Shabbat. We're going to be keeping some of these feast days.
It is written here. I can't deny that.
If that's the case, then does that kind of contradict what we were saying as far as the fulfillment of the law? Christ been fulfilling the law or fulfilling these feast days.
Some people wouldn't even entertain this conversation because they're like, of course you got to keep it. You know, there's no questioning, there's no reasoning, there's no thinking of it. And it's not to say you're not keeping it. It's, are you keeping it?
All right. So what I'm asking is, when we take in consideration these feast days are going to be practiced when Christ returns. So we say, like I just got through saying, okay, Christ fulfilled these feast days. Well,
Right.
we can read in Zechariah where they're going to be keeping the feast, and they got to come up to the kingdom
Right.
to certain times, so many times a year to keep these feasts.
Right.
So how do we respond to that?
Well, I think the last aspect of what you just said with about people having to come up to this particular location during that time to keep the feast, that's a big aspect because that will be the reestablishment of the true powerhouse of the world. And when that leadership is in place, um, I feel like those things will be reinstituted. That's what it seems as though will take place. You know what I'm saying? Just like, when we look at Christ, and I know this is a small thing. This is not to say that it means, oh, Christ saying, no, you don't need to keep the feast days. But Christ is like, I'm not going to drink that fruit of the vine again until, I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And I think when that kingdom come in, there's going to be a reinstitution of certain things. But right now, as it speaks, I don't think it's possible to keep those things not being in a kingdom or not being in a society that allows for you to do it in the way in which it needs to be done, if that makes sense. Because you're going to fail and fall short every time. You know what I'm saying? So that's how I look at that situation. That's not to negate the fact that, it is written here. I can't deny that. That's undeniable fact. But, you know, um, yes, that's how I feel about that situation.
Yeah. So, Zechariah, I just want to read it too.
Yeah, yeah.
Zechariah 14:18 says, "And if the families of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." So this is after Christ has come back and established his kingdom on earth in Jerusalem.
Right.
The heathen that don't come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacle will be smited with a plague. So these feasts are going to be kept during the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ.
Right.
Right. Let me go to because I'm trying to be fair and objective here. Because as I'm asking these questions, I'm making these statements. These scriptures are coming to my mind. Like, well, what about
Right.
this? What about that? Right? Let me see. In Isaiah 66:23, you start at verse 14, just to put it in context. Verse 15, Isaiah 66 and verse 15, just to put it in context, it says,
Right.
"For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger and fury, and rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many." So we know this is the second coming of Christ, what this is
Right.
referring to, right? And then it goes on to talk about people eating swine's flesh the behind the altars and hiding behind trees, eating unclean and abominable foods, and they're going to be destroyed with the sinners, right? So then Jump down to verse 23 or 22. Says, well, let's start at verse. Oh man, I kind of want to read the whole thing. I'm just gonna read it from 15 down, just so you get the whole. Cause it's not that much, right? It says, Isaiah 66, starting at verse 15. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger and fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the garden behind one tree, in the midst eating swine's flesh, and abominations, and the mouse shall be consumed together, saith the Lord. Right? So this is when Christ come back, people that eat unclean food will be consumed, thus saith the Lord. And then verse 18 says, for I know their work and their thoughts. It shall come that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. Right? So this is when, everybody's going to have to come to Jerusalem. It says, and I will set a sign among them, and I will send those that escape of them unto the nations, to Tarshish, to Pul, to Lud, that draw the bow, to Tabal and Javan, to the isles afar off, that have not heard my fame, neither have seen my glory. And they shall declare my glory among the Gentiles. So this is after Christ has destroyed all the world's armies. The
Right.
people that survived that, the Gentiles, nations that came against him that survived, he's gonna send them out to let everybody else know, hey, it's a new chief in town, new king in town, and to bring to gather the Most High's chosen people and bring them back to Jerusalem, because they're gonna bring the Most High chosen people back to Jerusalem, to Christ, and say, here's your people, here's what you want. Please don't kill us, please don't destroy. They're gonna bring us like an offering. And verse 20 says, and they shall bring all your brethren for an offering unto the Lord out of all nations, upon horses and chariots and in litters and upon mules and upon swift beasts, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, saith the Lord, as the children of Israel bring an offering in clean vessels into the house of the Lord. And verse 21
Mm.
says, and I will also take of them for priests and for Levites, saith the Lord. So now we see that the Levitical priesthood is going to be reinstated when Christ comes back. Interesting, because as of now, there are no Levites. There's practicing Levites, but when Christ comes back, the Levites going to be reinstituted. Then it says, verse 22 says, for as the new heavens and new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. Talking to the children of Israel. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another. So new moons are Sabbath days and feast days. And it says, from one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. So when Christ established his kingdom, we will be keeping the Shabbat and the new moons. And it says, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcass of men that have transgressed against me. For their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be abhorrent unto all flesh. So when Christ comes back, we're going to be keeping Shabbat. We're going to be keeping some of these feast days. You got to excuse my voice. I'm going to have to get some water in a minute. But if that's the case, then does that kind of contradict what we were saying as far as the fulfillment of the law? Christ been fulfilling the law or fulfilling these feast days while we keeping them, or I mean, how do those scriptures coincide and not contradict what we were just saying a few minutes ago?
Well, I think that, for example, we look at Christ's sacrifice. Um, and you can read Hebrews on this where it talks about, like since Christ come, the need for certain sacrifice is unnecessary now because Christ came and died and fulfilled that particular sacrifice. So um, I think that what you just read doesn't take away from the fact that we no longer do animal sacrifice for the remission of sins because Christ came and died for our sins. And we also know that animal sacrifice is, a big part of the holy days. So I don't think there's a contradiction there. I do think that we all can look at something and see, okay, here's a reinstitution of this, or a reestablishment of this, you know. And it makes sense with our people coming out of captivity, especially, many of our people being scattered across the world, don't know who they are, don't know, where they come from, for this to be something that needs to be done. It's just like when we came out of Egypt the first time, there needed to be a reinstitution because we were in Egypt for 200 plus years and we lost our way. We lost, our identity, if you will, to a certain extent, you know. So when we came out of there, Most High was like, okay, now I'm going to reinstitute or reestablish, what I established with your forefathers, with you as a nation. And this is what it's going to be. So when we talk about this, man, and you look at Exodus, for example, we know that Exodus wasn't the first time that the Sabbath was instituted. We know that the dietary law, that wasn't the first time it was instituted. We know that there were certain aspects of the law that were already in place with our forefathers. But again, they had to be reinstituted. So I don't see that as a contradiction. I just think that, it brings clarification to the matter that, when Christ comes back, then, we going to, have to do certain things again. You know what I'm saying? And he's going to make it clear on where we do it, when we do it, how we do it.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I'm thinking about when you're reading these prophecies, it's not all the feast days. It's just certain
Right.
ones that's mentioned. Like it
Exactly.
mentions
That's another thing.
tabernacle, because it doesn't mention the Passover in any
Right.
prophecy.
And Passover was one of the main. You talk about what's the main thing in our community right now. It's Passover,
Mm,
people. So
man.
tabernacle, we need to go back and look at that and look at that again, man. Because I know tabernacle, we did that coming out of Egypt. You know, um, on top of Passover and other things, but there was some significance to tabernacle. I need to go back and look at that one, but yeah, I think it's going to be a reinstitution, man. I don't think it's going to be us. Well, we shouldn't be looking at that like, yeah, see, well, you should be doing it right now because animal sacrifice is way out of the picture, man. I think that's clear according to the New Testament. There are a lot of things in the Torah in general like that, or just not in the Bible as a whole, but like in the Torah itself, like that we should explore more, like in terms of, you know, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, what's right, what's wrong. Like you brought up two aspects of it, you know, um, the holy days and the Shabbat. Like I think that's big. Some people wouldn't even entertain this conversation because they're like, of course you got to keep it. There's no questioning, there's no reasoning, there's
Well,
no thinking of it. And it's not to say you're not keeping it. It's, are you keeping it the
right.
way it's required of you?
Check. Hey.